Poker players use plus EV decisions every single day to thrive in an environment defined by chaos and incomplete information. It is a mindset that separates the amateurs from the professionals, but the fascinating part is that this isn't just a gambling strategy. It's a fundamental mathematical law that can be applied to almost any high-stakes choice in business and investment. Expected value, or EV, is effectively a way to put a price tag on uncertainty, allowing you to weigh the potential for a massive payout against the probability of a total loss. If you look at the track records of people like Jeff Bezos or Warren Buffett, you'll see they don't hunt for certainties. They hunt for positive expectancy. We are going to break down how to stop chasing results and start building a process that guarantees long-term success by thinking exactly like a high-stakes poker pro. It's a complete shift in how you view the world. In most areas of life, we're taught to judge a decision by its outcome. If you start a business and it fails, people say it was a bad idea. If you make a risky investment and lose money, you're told you were reckless. But in the world of plus EV, the outcome of a single event is almost irrelevant. A professional poker player might lose a $100,000 hand and still walk away happy if they know the math was in their favor. They understand that if they make that same exact move 1,000 times, they'll come out ahead. That's the core of expected value. It's the average outcome if you were to repeat a decision an infinite number of times. In business, you can't repeat a merger or a product launch 1,000 times, but you can build a career out of 1,000 plus EV decisions. When you do that, the luck eventually washes out and only the quality of your decision-making remains. That idea of the luck washing out is key, but I want to get into the actual mechanics of it. For anyone who isn't a math whiz, how do you actually calculate this in a way that doesn't require a chalkboard and a PhD? If I'm looking at a new marketing campaign or a potential stock pick, how do I find the EV? The formula itself is actually quite elegant. You take the probability of a positive outcome and multiply it by the gain you'd receive. Then you take the probability of a negative outcome and multiply it by the amount you'd lose. Subtract the loss from the gain, and that's your expected value. Let's look at a concrete example from a recent analysis by Acquiring Alpha. They discussed an investor looking at a software company for $50,000. The business currently nets $2,000 a month in profit. At first glance, it looks like a simple 25-month payback period. But a plus EV thinker looks deeper. They might estimate a 70% chance the business stays steady, a 20% chance it declines to $1,000 a month, and a 10% chance it fails completely. When you run those numbers, 0.7 times 2,000 plus 0.2 times 1,000 plus 0.1 times 0, you get an expected monthly profit of $1,600. That's your plus EV. It's lower than the current performance, but it's a much more honest representation of the investment's worth because it accounts for the risk of failure. So, it's basically a weighted average of all possible futures. But here's the problem. In poker, the odds are fixed by the deck. There are 52 cards, and we know exactly how likely a flush is. In business, these probabilities, like that 10% failure rate, are just guesses. How do we avoid just making up numbers that make us feel good about a decision we already want to make? That is the ultimate challenge, and it's where the concept of calibration comes in. Nate Silver, the statistician behind 538, talks about this in his work on forecasting. He argues that the goal isn't to be right every time, it's to be well calibrated. If you say something has a 40% chance of happening, and over the long run, it happens about 40% of the time, you're a great forecaster. To get there in business, you have to look at historical data and base rates. If you're starting a restaurant, don't just guess your success rate. Look at the Small Business Administration data, which shows that roughly 20% of new businesses fail in their first year and 50% are gone by year 5. That's your starting point. You then adjust that base rate based on your specific edge. Maybe your location is better, or your team is more experienced. You are moving from blind guessing to informed estimation. It's about being less wrong over time rather than being perfectly right immediately. It seems like this requires a level of emotional detachment that most people struggle with. If I put my life savings into a startup and it fails, it doesn't matter if it was a plus EV decision, I'm still broke. How do professional gamblers or investors like Warren Buffett handle the ruin factor? Even if the EV is positive, a bad run can still take you out of the game entirely. You've hit on the most critical part of the strategy, bankroll management. In poker, you never put your entire bankroll on the table at once, no matter how much of an edge you have. In the investment world, this is often discussed through the lens of capital preservation. Warren Buffett famously has two rules. Rule number 1, never lose money. Rule number 2, never forget rule number 1. Now, obviously, Buffett has lost money on individual trades. He's called his investment in Berkshire Hathaway itself one of his biggest mistakes because it was originally a failing textile mill. What he really means is never take a risk that can result in a permanent loss of capital that prevents you from playing the next hand. This is why position sizing is so important. Even if a startup has a massive plus EV, you don't bet everything on it. You want to stay in the game long enough for the math to work in your favor. If you have a 60% edge, but you bet your whole net worth, you still have a 40% chance of total ruin. That's not a smart bet. That's a gamble. I'm thinking about Jeff Bezos and the creation of Amazon. When he left D.E. Shaw, which was a massively successful hedge fund, he was making a huge bet. But he didn't use a spreadsheet for that, did he? He used what he calls the regret minimization framework. How does that fit into this mathematical world of plus EV? Regret minimization is actually a qualitative form of plus EV. Bezos projected himself to age 80 and asked which path he'd regret more, trying and failing to start an internet company or never trying at all. He realized that the cost of the regret from not trying was far higher than the cost of a failed business. In his mind, the expected value of starting Amazon was positive because the potential upside was the birth of the internet, and the downside, returning to a high-paying job with a great resume, was manageable. He was weighing the long-term emotional and financial payoffs against the immediate risks. It shows that plus EV isn't just about dollars and cents, it's about maximizing the value of your life over a 50-year horizon. He accepted the variance of the startup world because the pot he was playing for was worth the risk of losing his initial buy-in. That's a powerful way to look at it, but let's look at the flip side, when the math looks good, but the decision is actually a disaster. We see this all the time in corporate acquisitions. A company like Blockbuster had the chance to buy Netflix for $50 million in the year 2000. On paper, at the time, maybe they thought the EV of keeping their brick-and-mortar dominance was higher. Where did they go wrong in their calculation? Blockbuster fell into a trap called resulting or outcome bias, mixed with a failure to account for changing probabilities. They looked at their current success, the late fees, the physical stores, and assumed those probabilities would remain constant. They didn't use Bayesian updating, which is a fancy term for updating your beliefs as new information comes in. As internet speeds increased and mailing DVDs became more efficient, the probability of the streaming model succeeding was skyrocketing. A plus EV thinker would have seen that even if Netflix had only a 10% chance of disrupting the entire industry, the payoff of owning that disruptor was so massive, billions of dollars, that a $50 million bet was an absolute steal. It was a plus EV move with almost infinite upside and a capped downside. By passing on it, they weren't being safe, they were making a massive EV decision because they ignored the potential for a total market shift. It sounds like they were playing a tight passive game, to use poker terms, and they got blinded out. But let's bring this down to an everyday business level. Hiring is one of the most common high-stakes decisions managers face. Can you actually use EV to decide who to hire? It feels so much more subjective than a coin flip. It is subjective, but companies are already trying to quantify it. Workday recently highlighted how HR teams can calculate the EV of a hire by looking at the average value a person in that role brings, say $50,000 in revenue, and weighing it against the cost of salary and training. But the real plus EV move in hiring is about looking for asymmetric upside. This is a concept Annie Duke, the poker champion turned decision scientist, emphasizes in her book Thinking in Bets. She points out that most hiring processes are designed to avoid bad hires, which often leads to picking safe candidates who have limited upside. A plus EV approach might involve hiring someone with a non-traditional background who has a 20% chance of being a superstar and an 80% chance of being just average. If the superstar's impact is 10 times that of a standard hire, the math says you should take that bet every time. You're looking for the outliers who can move the needle rather than just trying to avoid a mistake. But that brings us back to the problem of resulting. If I hire that wild card and they fail, my boss is going to blame me for a bad decision. In a corporate environment, you are often punished for bad outcomes even if the process was sound. How do you survive as a plus EV thinker when the world around you only cares about the result of the last hand?
This is why the culture of an organization matters so much. If you're in an environment that punishes every failure, you'll inevitably end up with a team of negative EV, risk-averse players. To truly apply these principles, you have to separate the quality of the decision from the quality of the outcome. Annie Duke uses the example of Pete Carroll's decision to pass the ball in the final seconds of Super Bowl 49. It was intercepted, and the Seahawks lost. The media called it the dumbest play in history, but if you look at the stats, that specific play had a near zero interception rate historically. It was a high percentage plus EV call that just happened to hit that 1% failure case. A smart organization conducts post-mortems on decisions, not just outcomes. They ask, what did we know at the time? Did we weigh the odds correctly? If the answer is yes, then the failure was just variance. Bad luck. You don't change a winning strategy just because of one bad bounce of the ball.
I like the idea of a pre-mortem too, thinking about the failure before it happens. If you assume the project has already failed and work backward to find out why, you're basically uncovering all those hidden negative probabilities in your EV equation. It forces you to be honest about the risks you're currently ignoring.
Exactly. It's about expanding the range of possible outcomes. Amateurs try to predict exactly what will happen. Professionals try to understand the entire range of what could happen and make sure they are profitable across that entire spectrum. In the stock market, this looks like looking at beta, the volatility of a stock relative to the market, and margin of safety. If you buy a stock at 50% of its intrinsic value, you've built in a massive cushion. Even if your growth estimates are a bit off, the EV remains positive because you've protected the downside. This is how the Oracle of Omaha operates. He isn't looking for a sure thing. He's looking for a wonderful company at a fair price where the probability-weighted upside far outweighs the price he's paying today.
So if someone wants to start living this way tomorrow, what's the first step? Do we start carrying around a calculator, or is it more about a change in language? I noticed you haven't used words like definitely or for sure much.
That's actually a great place to start. Stop using binary language. Instead of saying, this project will succeed, say, I'm 70% confident this will succeed. That simple change forces your brain to acknowledge the 30% chance of failure. Once you acknowledge it, you can plan for it. The second step is to start a decision journal. Write down the probabilities you're assigning to a choice and the reasons why. 6 months later, go back and look at it. You'll quickly see if you're over-optimistic or if you're ignoring certain types of risks. This is how you sharpen your internal odds calculator. Over time, you'll stop feeling the sting of every loss and start feeling the quiet satisfaction of knowing you're making the right bets. It's about moving from being a gambler who hopes to get lucky to being the house, the one who knows that as long as they keep the edge, the math will take care of the rest.
It turns life into a game of skill rather than a game of chance. Even when you lose, you can still win if you know your process was right. That kind of mental resilience is probably the most valuable asset any entrepreneur or investor can have. It's the difference between being crushed by a setback and seeing it as just another data point in a much larger, more profitable series of events.
And that is the ultimate takeaway. In the short term, you're at the mercy of the cards. But in the long term, you are the author of your own average. If you consistently choose the path with the highest expected value, success isn't just a possibility. It becomes a mathematical inevitability. You just have to be willing to play the long game and trust the numbers even when the world is screaming about the results of the last hand.
Expected value isn't about predicting the future. It is about being prepared for all of them and ensuring that on average, the future you end up in is the one where you've come out on top. If you found these strategies for navigating uncertainty useful, share this episode with someone who is facing a high-stakes decision and could use a better framework for making their next move.